Good afternoon, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join the Silver Fox Advisors for our 2020 CEO Education Series. We are very excited to present the third installment of our four-part series on the pillars of business growth. My name is Joseph Tung, and I've been a practicing attorney from Houston for over 18 years, with the last 10 years under the flag of Tung Law Firm, which is dedicated to providing and delivering concierge business solutions to owners and investors in a growth or pivot process. I am a proud member of the Silver Fox Advisors, which is a group of experienced business leaders that advises, consults, and mentors the Houston business community since 1986. Our goal is to empower business owners to become successful. Before we begin with our panel, I want to take a few moments to highlight our programs. We host fantastic lunch and learn programs that typically meet monthly at the Houston Racquet Club from January through October. But because of COVID-19, we have produced a virtual format. Last month, we had James Olson, the former CIA Chief of Counterintelligence, thrill us about the world of spies and traitors. This month, we will have Kent Friedman from the Sports Authority speak to the state of professional sports and the rise of esports. You can sign up for the free online presentations at our website, www.silverfox.org. Our organization also supports 20 CEO roundtables for nearly 200 CEOs across the greater Houston area. They typically meet once a month physically, but with COVID-19, many of our roundtables have pivoted into meeting virtually every week. These roundtables provide valuable peer support during this critical time. If you're interested in joining, you can request an application to find more information at our website, www.silverfox.org. That brings me to the CEO Education Series, which consists of 4 sessions on emerging from COVID-19 through 4 pillars of business growth. Our first session focused on customer acquisition entitled Revving Up Your Business After COVID-19. Last month, we focused on financial drivers. Today, we will focus and discuss organization effectiveness. And finally, processes and systems in September. We hope that you find them helpful to your business as you navigate and emerge from COVID-19. You can register for all of these sessions at our website, www.silverfox.org. I would like to now introduce our prestigious panel for today. First, we have Lane Sloan, who is a visionary strategist, having authored 2 leadership books. With an undergraduate in business and master degrees in accounting, quantitative management, science, and finance, he taught courses at the University of Houston for many years. Lane served as VP of Corporate Planning, CFO, and President of Shell Chemicals in a career spanning nearly 30 years. He has been invested and advised in many companies and has been a part of the Silver Fox Advisors for 2 decades. Next, we have Ned Mueller, who served as a U.S. Marine fighter pilot and test pilot, a program and project manager in human space flight vehicles, followed by work in the upstream oil and gas industry. He is founder and CEO of Mueller Consultants, LLC, providing services in operational risk management and senior leadership consulting. He currently serves as an entrepreneur in residence at Houston Community College's Center for Entrepreneurship Southeast. In addition to serving as an executive board member for Target Evolution, he's also an instructor at the Amazon Small Business Academy. Next, we have Rainey Busby, a successful entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and operational excellence practitioner. She has held various leadership positions across software, consulting, healthcare, banking, transportation, energy, aerospace, and manufacturing industries. Her experience ranges from a large $13 billion turnaround initiative to numerous business startup ventures. You may have heard of the book Traction, Get a Grip on Your Business by Gino Wickman, which showcases the EOS Entrepreneur Operational System model. Rainey was one of the first 100 EOS worldwide implementers to become professionally trained over 5 years. There are more than 360 EOS implementers who have worked with over 9,000 companies across the globe. Rainey works with entrepreneurial business owners and their leadership teams to advise and implement a powerful yet simple operating system to optimize overall business operations. Many were lacking clear vision and execution skills to achieve that vision through discipline, accountability, and metrics, which are all critical elements to any successful business. Finally, we have Doug Thorpe, who is the president and CEO of Headway Exec LLC, where since 2008, he works closely with executive clients around the globe to help individuals develop advanced leadership skills. Doug has leveraged his own executive coaching training to create and implement effective training programs and advisory services for senior leadership teams. Throughout his executive career, Doug has held leadership positions at organizations including JPM Chase, Texas Commerce Bank, Profile Business Systems LLC, and Solomon Edwards Group LLC. His clients include ExxonMobil, CenterPoint, Brightview, Crane Logistics, Bank of America, TD America Bank, Lee Hecht Harrison, Franklin Covey, and the Houston Society for the Performing Arts. He was the founder and director of Jobs Ministry Southwest, a non-denominational, faith-based 501c3 jobs ministry which was featured in Fortune magazine. Since its establishment in 2008, the ministry has delivered over 35,000 training and career coaching hours. His leadership blog, www.dougthorpe.com, was ranked in the top 100 leadership blogs list in 2016 and has over 125,000 social media followers. As the resident lawyer for today, I can confidently say that no presentation would be complete without a legal disclaimer. As such, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by any presenter today belong solely to that person and are not attributable to other people, groups, employers, organizations, or the Silver Fox advisors. Notwithstanding each individual's credentials or licenses, the information provided does not constitute legal, tax, investment, or accounting advice, but is designed only to provide general information relating to business and commerce. I now turn over the presentation to Lane Sloan.
Thanks, Joseph. Let's start off with the bottom line. We can go to the slide. Organization effectiveness equals organization success. And wouldn't you like a little success in this pandemic crisis? As you're going to hear today, organization effectiveness is even more important in a time of crisis. And this pandemic is truly a mammoth disruption. Unfortunately, some people see organization effectiveness as the soft side of business, and it can be rather amorphous to get your hands around. But without organization effectiveness, your chance of growing and building your business become a remote likelihood, with or without a crisis. Now, there are a lot of components that impact organization effectiveness, which is why it seems somewhat amorphous. But to address that, we're going to take you through this organizational framework that brings all the pieces together in a thoughtful construct. And you see there are four main components that contain individual ingredients. And each speaker will go into detail in each of these components. Now, first, it all begins with providing effective direction. As the old slogan goes, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. The next step is to execute that direction. Now, I once had a consultant tell me that of the strategic plans that fail, 80% are a result of poor execution. That can largely be solved through efficient coordination. Of course, organizations are all about people. And having a high-performing organization relies on highly motivated people. How do you build that? Lastly, sustainability depends on ongoing results. However, no one expected a crisis the likes of this pandemic that can take down even a well-run business. So what ingredients can ameliorate this crisis? Let's find out. Ned will kick us off with the ingredients for effective direction.
Hello, everyone. Let's ask the most basic question. What is leadership? There are a lot of commonly accepted definitions. In fact, if you Google it, one of the lead things that pops up is over 200 definitions of leadership. And I will take it even further and say there are probably as many definitions as people profess to practice or exercise leadership. And in fact, U.S. military at West Point, they define leadership as getting people to do something they otherwise would not. I take it a step further. Leadership really imbues people with the vision and the purpose of the institution, so they accept that at the very root level, and they take responsibility for executing that. And to go on to another concept, let's talk about lead versus manage. I can manage processes, or I can manage things. I can manage schedules, inventory. I can manage stock. I can manage logistics. But if I use the term leadership, I'm talking about dealing with human beings at the very basic level. And as such, that puts a moral imperative on leadership and its responsibility. Because I'm dealing with human beings, I'm dealing with their hopes, their ambitions, their families. In some very high-risk professions, I'm dealing with their very lives themselves. on there. And with that moral imperative comes accountability. A true leader is always, always accountable. He can hold other people within the organization accountable, but the leader understands intuitively and practices it every day that accountability begins and ends with him or her. A lot of people will try and make leadership a complex concept. In fact, that's how a number of people sell books. But leadership is really very simple because it deals with human beings. But just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. And the reason why is effective leadership is exercised countless times per day, day in and day out, and it involves the leader's behavior. And people observe that. Let's speak briefly about leadership during crises. And this happens in a lot of professions. Some examples are a doctor in the ER room, when you talk about military and combat operations, when you talk about first responders during some sort of disaster. COVID-19 is a good case in point. Then it becomes incumbent upon the leader to exert a sense of calm and purpose so people can execute what they need to execute and not waste a lot of energy or emotion. In fact, I was taught as a young officer, you never run unless there's incoming fire. You can move with purpose and alacrity, but you never run because you want to communicate that sense of calmness to others within the organization. Let's talk about vision. Vision is what the organization or institution strives to be. It's never achieved. It's always something that's in the future and out there over the horizon. Now you can get close to it, but again, it's something, it's a goal you strive for. Those institutions that have been able to sustain that vision and pursue that vision, those are the ones that actually achieve institutional excellence. And that becomes a generational thing. Who creates and sustains the vision? Essentially everyone within the organization or the institution, but the leader is primarily responsible for creating and sustaining the vision. If it's a stand-up organization and newly created, obviously that vision will have to be created and begins with the leader and the leadership team around him. However, there are a number of institutions, some that have been around for a century or two, where that vision has always been there. And that is incumbent upon the leader to take that vision and internalize it and become one with that vision. People in the organization are ultimately accountable for the vision, but the leader, and back one more, but the leader is really the one who's primarily responsible for that. And as such, they also be able to communicate clarity in pursuing the vision. If people have to ask what the vision is, or you have to take a couple of paragraphs explaining it, you probably don't have a clearly stated vision. And the vision and the culture, that really sort of goes hand in hand. And that culture, which again, we can loosely describe as what people do when no one else is looking in an organization. That culture, the vision ought to be at the center of that. And next we'll go on to talking about the customer. Let's first ask the question, who is the customer? And sometimes we get a little confused on that. If you're purely organization or you're focused on the customer and it's a direct, let's say a lot of retail organizations and stuff, that holds true. However, as you get more complex in an organization, let's say you're a publicly traded company or you have others in the community that rely on your behavior, there are a number of stakeholders in that. Even the employees themselves and the members within the institution could be considered stakeholders. Which brings us to balance versus focus. A lot of time we stress balancing things, but in doing that, you also need to be able to maintain the focus. The bottom line is if the customer ever loses the feeling that you aren't trying to delight them and focus on them you're probably failing at it. So again, all of those things sort of work together. Sometimes they work in tension, but again, it's up to the leader and the leadership team to be able to balance that out. Now, admittedly, for small companies and stuff, a lot of these responsibilities are going to fall on the leader or the owner of that. Okay. And again, how this all ultimately feeds into culture is critical. because that relationship with your stakeholders and the customer is really the ultimate sign of what the culture is and how does the culture behave. Next, we'll talk briefly about planning. The role of leadership in planning is critical. Again, remember the leader is a spark plug in there. But because of that, there are others in the organization that are also responsible for executing parts of the plan. Again, this does not take away the ultimate responsibility and accountability the leader has on there. They ultimately have to answer whether or not the plan has been executed, whether it's a good plan, and whether it's been executed successfully. Everyone owns the plan, but again, this ultimate success or failure of the plan is owned by the leader. And let's talk about what the leader wants to focus on really is more of the what. Again, this depends on the size of the organization. In large organizations, part of what the leader does is ensure he has a leadership and management team that knows how to accomplish various tasks within the plan on there. And good leaders are able to communicate effectively to where the what is understood by everyone. And then you have faith in your own people to be able to go out and execute that plan. And again, you see this kind of thing fails when people tend to micromanage. A good leader will set the goals and then let his team of capable individuals execute that plan. And with that, thanks. I want to hand it over to Rainey. Mute.
All right, sorry about that. So my role in working with clients is to guide them through the structure of organizational excellence or operational excellence. And one of the biggest challenges they face, especially small businesses, is communication, right? So I thought it was a good start to create this statement about organizational communication and how it's such an integral part of effective management practices. If we can't communicate clearly, we can't set expectations and we can't help guide our workforce. So it's not just the fact of communication, it also is about making sure that we understand the dialogue around it, the productivity of that communication. Is it thoughtful? Are we creating a place where people can have maybe sometimes some uncomfortable conversations or step into a little bit of conflict? So it's about being able to build those relationships. So next slide. There we go. All right, so let's talk a little bit about dialogue and communication, right? This is the biggest challenge. 80% of companies struggle with communication. You need to understand all the different facets of the communication kind of program. And so I encourage people to think about the program. So the importance of how do we communicate, right? So communicating a consistent vision is very important. So Ned talked about, let's get it defined, let's get it documented. Now let's spread the word. And I tell leaders that your job is to constantly be communicating what that vision is. So you need to be able to say it multiple times. And I tell people they have to hear it 7 times before they hear it the first time. So if you've said it 4 times and you're frustrated, you got 3 more times to go, right? So keep that in mind. We have to constantly be reminding people. And let's talk about the right meeting pulse. Are you having one-on-one meetings with your direct reports? Right? Are you making sure that dialogue is going both ways? Are you having weekly team meetings where people are bringing issues, they're solving issues? And do we have a quarterly state of the company meeting where we're bringing people together and here's where we were, here's where we are today, and here's where we're going? So we're communicating with everyone across the board. It can't be the best kept secret because then you're going to be one person trying to lead that execution of vision. And then are you setting clear expectations? You know, the stats is 50% of people have no idea what's expected of them at work. Shame on us as leaders and managers. So we need to make sure we're not only setting clear expectations, but we're understanding their expectations as well. How we deliver the communication, right? So you hear the horror stories of people receiving a text message saying, hey, by the way, we're going to be laying you off or you're being terminated. That's the wrong mode of communication. So what do we need to communicate? And then how do we do it? Do we do electronically? Is it in person? Do we wait 24 hours before we respond to that email, right? Especially if it's got a little edgy side to it. And then the question to statement ratio. Very important for you to think about as a leader. You're not the one who should be talking. You should be doing more listening. So I like to say the employee should be speaking 80% of the time. You should be speaking 20% of the time. And when you are speaking, you're asking questions. How would you approach that? What other solution could we come up with? And then the echo, right? Confirming, this is what I thought I heard you say. And so make sure that goes on both sides. And then the timeliness of the feedback, right? Feedback is critical. Don't wait until the end of the year to do your annual performance review and provide feedback. You need to deliver that feedback quickly. It needs to be within that 24-hour period. And if it's going to be kind of critical feedback, you want to do that in private, right? If we want to praise people, we do that in public. So there's some good guidelines for you to think about and follow. Next slide, please. All right, so one of the things we do to help provide clarity across the organization, and if you are familiar with Traction or the EOS model, Entrepreneurial Operating System, we have an accountability chart. It's not an org chart. In our opinion, org charts drive dysfunction, and titles do as well. They're great for your business card outside the organization, but we need something to clearly be able to outline what our structure is. Who do I need to go to if I have a specific question, let's say about sales? Who is ultimately accountable for that function? So where does the buck stop? So in each one of those boxes, we assign a person. They're ultimately accountable. And then we also outline the 5 to 7 areas of responsibility for each one of those boxes so that the whole organization is clear on their role and how they're accountable. We also want to make sure that we define criteria for success. So every one of those boxes, what does it mean when I had a great week, and be able to track that on a weekly basis so that we can be more predictive. This is also a great way for people to see opportunities within career paths. So if you have a larger organization and someone may want to look at doing something in operations, and maybe they're in marketing right now, this gives them an opportunity to see all the roles that are there. So it's a great chance to talk about future with your employees, and that's how you retain those folks as well. Especially when we're talking about the COVID, we use the accountability chart to grow. Now with all this crisis and crazy going on, I've been working with my clients to help them to reduce their organization, to understand what roles they need to be able to move forward so that we're not removing roles that are going to cause problems later on as we're trying to run day to day. As a leader, you need to be able to delegate, right? So this is a great way for you to see how many hats you're wearing on your head. Right? Small businesses wear a lot of hats. You need to start thinking about delegating so you don't become that bottleneck. And so that's some good characteristics to keep in mind. Practice the accountability chart. I think you'll have fun doing it. Next slide, please. All right, so this is one of my favorite authors, Patrick Lencioni. I teach this to my clients during their annual sessions, and he really has this pyramid that has clearly defined how to build a healthy, cohesive team. And it all starts with the foundation of trust. So if we don't build the solid foundation of trust, we're not going to create an environment where people are going to be comfortable stepping into kind of some healthy conflict, right? And if they don't step into the conflict and say what they need to say and have those really healthy debates, then we're not doing what we should do for our organization to make them more successful. So we need to create the ability to not only be in the conflict, but then the commitment of it. The team makes the decision. They may not have chose my decision, but I agree with the decision made by the team rather than saying, yeah, whatever, I'll go along and I go off and do my own thing, which I've seen all of this happen. Once we commit as a team, we need to be willing to hold each other accountable to make sure that we deliver on the commitment that we agreed to. And that accountability drives results. So if you start at the bottom, if we have no trust, then people aren't going to step into the fear of conflict. They're not going to commit. They're going to be out doing their own thing. They're going to avoid accountability. And I've seen a lot of leaders who self-select out of organizations. They're not willing to step in there because it's kind of tough, right? Especially the peer pressure, those weekly meetings I talked about, want to watch some accountability happen. And then ultimately our objective is to have a high performing, healthy team that delivers results. And so that gives you a little perspective. You see the books there. Patrick has a couple of them, 5 dysfunctions of a team, and then a field guide. So I encourage you to challenge yourself and rate how is your team functioning on each one of those levels. Next slide. All right, ready to turn this over to Doug.
Well, thank you, Rainey. And Rainey did a good job of introducing that foundational principle of building trust on your team. So I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail. In 2012, Google launched their own internal project called Project Aristotle to study hundreds of their own internal teams. They were puzzled by the idea that they knew they hired the best. They knew their hiring practice was very long and elaborate and intentional, but yet once somebody got hired and joined a team, not all teams performed at the highest level. So they embarked on this study. It included 50 years of management theory and text about team histories and team development. They studied 180 of their own teams. And what they quickly discovered was that the who didn't matter. The person or persons on the teams really weren't big indicators of which team was going to be successful. They also quickly uncovered the fact that there weren't any particular patterns of what contributed to effective teams. The social norms, like going out for a beer after work or playing ping pong on breaks, didn't have a contributing significance in the success of teams. So the study continued, and finally what they revealed was that there was one common element. They called it psychological safety, but the simple definition, if you read the full report, is the word trust. Psychological safety is a team climate characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect in which people are comfortable being themselves. There's no airs, there's no pretense. It's just an ability to come to work, bring your best, and contribute. So with that as a backdrop, we say, well, how do we really create trust? Trust is earned, trust is easily lost, but how do we as leaders and owners do something to create an environment of trust so that we have that positive culture? I'm going to share with you a 6-step model, and there's a tremendous amount of content in this, but I'm going to try to hit the high points so that you can understand the essence of this. Part of this model is based on the premise, if any of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we as human beings go through our lives vacillating up and down on this hierarchy of need. And it starts with food and shelter. If we're not fed and we're not safe, we can't operate beyond that. We have to solve that problem first before we can operate at the next highest level. And there are multiple levels in that hierarchy. So that is really kind of the basis of this theory, of this trust model. So what we mean by that is, let's look at the model going around in clockwise fashion here. We start with the question of the people question. Do I even want to be on this team? People get themselves recruited into a company or a job, or you as an owner will hire people with the best of expectations. But the reality is, as soon as that person reports for duty, they begin solving this question, do I even want to be here? That's a critical first step question that all owners really need to be sensitive to. Just because somebody agreed to take your job offer doesn't mean they necessarily want to be there. So you've got to ferret that out and resolve that first. Then the next step is purpose. Does the individual, your employee, understand why the team exists? And you've heard my other colleagues here talk about communication and vision. If you as the owner cannot explain that purpose, you're going to have people stuck at step number 2 in the model here. As soon as someone gets past that second question, they're going to move on to number 3, the plan. What's the plan? How are we going to do what we say we're going to do? Can I buy into the plan? Can I appreciate the plan? When you get past the plan, you go to practice. Now I got to look at the tools, systems, process, and procedures that are going to get me there. Can I buy into that? Or is there an inadvertent constraint? Is there a roadblock for my success of getting me through to the complete performance? Number 5 is the question, all right, how are you going to measure success? Hey, Mr. Boss or Miss Boss Lady, how are you going to measure my success? What does success look like? what is a win? Is there going to be a fair assessment of my performance? And lastly, the payoff. Is the payoff going to be worth it? And payoff is not just about the paycheck, but it's about the sense of accomplishment. It's about the individual and the collective reward for having achieved everything that was defined as success. If you as an owner leader can work with your people and get them through these 6 critical questions, you will see a kind of momentum start to build. Remember, as a leader, one of the biggest things you've got to do is influence your people to agree to dedicate 100% of their discretionary effort to your work. What do I mean by discretionary effort? That's that choice people have after they've done the very basics of their job description. If they still have time, energy, and capacity to do something extra, will they do it? And as soon as you can solve and regularly convince people, give them answers to these 6 questions, you will see their willingness to commit discretionary effort rise. And with that, you will start seeing much higher performance on your team. So let's talk again about goals. We've already said this, and it's going to sound like we're beating it to death, but communication is key. I like the phrase, when you think about communication, if you confuse, you lose. It's true in the buying sense. It's true in the work we do with our people. If we tell them too much and we are too complicated, we're going to lose their attention. And so your communication has to be direct and pointed. Your clarity of purpose has to be consistent. Excuse me. You want to avoid mixed messaging. You've got to be able to articulate what winning looks like. Explain those expectations, your expectations as an owner. Help your people understand what winning looks like in your mind. And then measurement as an owner, I love this phrase too, and this is also a military thing that I started with many years ago. Inspect what you expect. You can talk all day long and you can lay out standards and performance documents, but if you're not checking it, if you're not out in the shop, out in the office, out in the field, looking at what's happening, those expectations will never be met. And as Rainey accurately stated, feedback is very vital to this whole process of keeping your people engaged, keeping them focused on the goals and working through it. When you get through all of these, you rinse and repeat. Keep at it. I've added a graphic here as a reminder of something that maybe most of you may know. It's about setting SMART goals. SMART means specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. If you can set your goals with these attributes, you will have a lot more success, keep your team motivated, and keep them moving toward that end game of real success. Now, lastly, for my section here, we'll talk about performance feedback. There is no doubt that in any kind of crisis management puts a premium on leadership. But as you're standing in the gap during a crisis, there are several key things to remember that are easily forgotten. Number one, keep up with your stars. What do I mean by that? Pay attention to your top performers. It's too easy to take top performers for granted. And if you do that, especially in a tight and competitive job market, which we will soon be into, your top performers are going to get offers, or they're going to go seeking offers if you have forgotten them, if you have not taken care of them through the process. So remember, you need to pay attention to those top performers. Now, conversely, you need to be quick and swift to deal with poor performance. It's often said that we owners, we will hire fast and fire slow. That's what our habits are, and that's a bad habit. You need to do the opposite. You need to hire slow and fire fast. You need to try to be much more intentional, much more deliberate in your selection of people to join your team. And then as you see performance starting to fail, yes, you've got to go through remediation efforts and things of that sort. But when you've made the determination that somebody's just not going to work out, please, by all means, be quick to deal with it. If you are not doing that with your teams, your best performers are going to get very discouraged. They're going to be very dissatisfied with how things are operating, mainly because they're the ones picking up the slack. And if a poor performer is held on to, that better performer is going to be picking up all the slack, and they're going to get very resentful of that. I have a tool that I've used for a number of years. I was introduced to this by actually someone who worked for me, and it's called the Big Five process. It's a very simple tool that managers can use to gauge accomplishments and achievements. Here's how it works. Every month you ask your people to give you a simple list of top 5 accomplishments, their top 5 accomplishments for the prior month. Have them list their view of the next 5 priorities that they're going to work on in the new month. And then if you want to allow them to add some bullet points about constraints and hurdles they believe they're encountering, they can list that too. But use that document as a coaching moment. Literally, where I've deployed this, we've set the standard, keeping the Big Five theme. We said by the 5th day of the new month, you turn this in and you have this process completed. Have that coaching moment to talk to your people about their accomplishments. It's a great time to give them their accolades and attaboys. You can do that. And then you can talk about their view of 5 priorities. You can gauge, recalibrate, and reassess the priorities. And some people ask me, well, what's a priority for the average worker? Well, if you've got a goal or a mission you're working on, that usually is broken down into component parts. So the old proverbial joke, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat him one bite at a time. Okay, what's your next 5 bites? And that's what you put in the priority list. And you as a leader or owner can talk with your people about this document, and you are literally on the same page month over month over month. And to Rainey's point, you don't have to wait to an annual assessment to talk to somebody about questionable performance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Lane.
All right, so we're on the last component, ongoing results. Now, there's a natural tendency for organizations to start looking more inward over time, rather than continually looking outward toward the customer, competitors, and other environmental impacts like this pandemic. And this eventually leads to the demise of the entity. Living systems follow the well-known S-shaped curve. So to stay viable over time, you need to keep adding new S's onto your curve. And practically, that translates to sustainability requiring ongoing results and growth. You have heard the old saying, if you're not growing, then you're dying. Now, you just heard Doug talk about performance feedback. You need an ongoing plan for performance assessment. But first, as this cartoon points out, do not have assessment sessions that are focused on blame, but rather take an objective look of where you're at. Moreover, I know that not every one of you has planned assessments, but I will tell you this, it is a key ingredient for success. Performance assessment keeps you focused on what you want to achieve, which leads to accountability and motivation, which everyone has previously discussed. Now, if you're looking outward, it enables you to also identify the need for adjustment and repositioning. Clearly, this pandemic has signaled the need for rapid adjustment and repositioning. And an inward focus delays the reaction pattern necessary for this pandemic, and it may not be recoverable. Now, Rainey, she's already talked about the need for various assessment sessions. Here's kind of my recommendations for the type of assessments that you should be doing on a normal basis. Now, the big point I want to make here is that too often longer term plans, they're simply put in the desk drawer, and the effort is usually placed entirely on the current year, with planning for the ultimate vision largely ignored. But for growth and achievement of your vision, the key is to look at the next couple years and determine what I call critical success factors that are necessary to keep you on the path. Now, the pandemic is an exception to the normal assessment program. First, you need a survival plan, probably including federal loans and so forth. Hopefully, most everyone has done this. The key point I want to make, though, is plan where you want to go to catch the next curve, as this pandemic is causing many transformational changes in the business environment. So let's go to the next slide. What are the ingredients for an organization to be prepared for responding to a crisis? Well, a colleague of mine at Royal Dutch Shell wrote a book on learning organizations, and he studied those organizations that had long lives. And it turns out learning was the key to long-term viability. He emphasized the point I started off with, that there had to be sensitivity to the business environment, looking outward. What is going on with your customer, potential customers, what new approaches your competitors are taking, and the bigger socioeconomic trends and so forth. But to learn, there must be a culture of tolerance and a willingness to hear out diverse opinions. Great leaders have this ability. The worst performing leaders are generally those with autocratic styles. If you have this learning culture, you can work on building your agility and adaptability. Now, when I was in college, and I'm in my 70s now, the buzzword was manage by exception. Then it turned into change is the constant with the information revolution. Now with the biotech revolution, where change is accelerating and it is much more chaotic. And no one would doubt this pandemic has caused more chaos. But with the chaotic change, one must also be agile enough to create the future, to gain some control over it, instead of reacting, proact. With this pandemic, it's really important right now to be aware of key shifts in your business and quickly adapt. This translates into more hands-on the business than on your people. You've been hearing this about delegation and so forth. Let them be part of leading the change. When Shell had a performance crisis in the early 1990s, I had to reduce my organization by half. There's about 4,400 in it, and we went down to 2,250. That's dramatic, so I understand what people are going through today. We had to do a lot of transformation, we had to do a lot of delayering of the organization, and so forth. But I did let the people figure out what to delayer. But we gave them the new vision of the future, and I can tell you it all worked out. So let's go to the next slide. I've already said organizations are all about people, and different people have different strengths and weaknesses. What you want to do is play to their strengths, get the right people in the right roles. A learning culture requires that you continuously focus on capability and skill development of your people. Now, I've given you some thoughts on this slide on where to focus for capability renewal and skill development. 2 points I want to make here. As mentioned, get the right people in the right roles based on their strengths, but then target skill development to further enhance their strengths. Don't try to develop everyone on every item. That is a waste of time, and it will diffuse their focus. Secondly, in a time of crisis, it is still important to work on capability renewal, particularly when you've repositioned the business. Fighting fires, as I know in a small business, can overwhelm everything else. However, it's a matter of prioritization. Now, back when I was president of Shell Chemical, I used to set aside time in my calendar to visit the different floors where my organization resided. And I'd pop into an office and have a chat and pop into another office and have a chat. And I can tell you what, I learned a lot about how things were going with the people, and that was invaluable. But my managers always wanted me to cancel those visits for their agenda. But for me, this was a priority. Now, we really don't have time to cover each one, but given the circumstances, the crisis circumstances, I would suggest a focus on those items under effective direction, particularly for yourself, leading in this time of crisis. And this event is one of the ways to further develop your leadership skills. So I applaud you for attending. And now we're going to open the session up for questions. All right, Doug, over to you. Are you getting anybody in on the chat?
We did have one question. Marilyn asked if we have a performance document that can be a document that's already been created that we can share. I think we will huddle and we can probably get something provided that we can share with you. Sure, Marilyn. If you'll catch up with one of us after this, on the current slide, you'll see our email contact information. Feel free to reach out to one of us and we'll be happy to help you with that.
Yeah, just a couple extra thoughts on that, Doug, in case anyone's interested. So I really encourage my clients not to do the annual reviews, look at quarterly reviews, and really the focus is, how did you do on your goals this quarter? Were you able to achieve what was expected? Did you meet those success criteria and metrics? And most importantly, if you really have good core values and you have created them in a way that they now become part of that fabric of your organization, I recommend you hold people accountable and assess them on that core value alignment, right? Because you want people that think and have that same drive and sense of urgency. That's what's really important. So we always say hire for core value alignment. You can teach people skills. So it's really easy to put together just a one-page simple document and focus on performance in the job, core value alignment. And I think she'd probably be good, but yeah.
So we do
add another point to that. One of the things that I found when I was a young supervisor is you'd give somebody an agreed date. They were supposed to deliver something. That date would come. You'd ask them, how where is it? And the answer would be, gee, I really haven't had time to work on that yet. And I thought to myself, boy, they're a problem. It turns out I was part of the problem, because what you have to do is beforehand, a week or so before the thing's due, you go in and ask the question, how are you coming along on the project? How's this particular item that, you said you were going to be able to do? How's it coming? And it turns out almost every time, a week later, the thing was done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Expect what you expect, right?
What you expect, and they know what the priorities are because you're asking about it.
Right.
So we've got a great question here from Deborah. In all seriousness, is it possible to get B players to become A players? I've got an answer, but one of you guys want to take it first?
Go ahead, Doug.
I think that's a great question, and I think the challenge is this: if you have not had the kinds of disciplines we've been talking about here in your entrepreneurial startup, it is hard to begin implementing. But a couple of thoughts on this. I think number one, we have to be careful at how we classify who's an A player and who's a B player. Some of the best employees I've ever had were not necessarily dazzling. They weren't dynamic. They weren't particularly impressive, but when they understood the task and they understood the expectation, they produced amazing work. So as a leader, you really have to get in and do a better assessment of who's really an A player and a B player. And my own kind of judgment here is when you assume there's a group of your team that is going to be in the B category and never able to rise up beyond that, that's more indicative of, quite frankly, in my opinion, a bad hiring process on your part than it is them being bad employees. I like the phrase, it's not about right and wrong, it's just different. You may have hired a person that's just not a good fit for your company, and it doesn't make them a bad person. It's just you don't have a good fit, so you need to manage through that.
Yeah, Doug, if I could briefly address that also.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, it brings up a couple of points, and I've seen organizations, you hear in different ways of a golden boy or a star performer or something like that, and there's a danger in doing that, or there's a risk in doing that, and it doesn't focus on how the team functions as an organization. So human beings, we have diverse talents and capabilities, and it's incumbent upon leadership and the leadership team to figure out how best to put those talents and capabilities together. A lot of times, some of your best folks are the quietest ones and the ones that gain attention, and we tend to do that. And unfortunately, a lot of our societal values tends to reinforce that. And even from a leadership position, and a lot of people will probably be surprised, a lot of times we think the most effective leader or the best leader is someone that everyone goes, that's a great leader. Or in fact, the most effective leader is someone who creates an atmosphere and an environment where people feel good about what they do on a daily basis and feel good about the organization as a team. And so some of this goes to de-emphasizing the superstar aspect of it. It goes to a selflessness on the part of the leader. And if there's true servant leadership, it will reinforce those kind of values.
And the thing I had mentioned, in my slides, strength-based leadership is a good way to think about things because different people have different strengths. That's, if you classify them in A and B and that, you're putting people all together and you really aren't separating out what's their strengths. And so when you do that, they're able to come to the forefront. The second thing, there are people who are willing to jump on board in the beginning. And when you've got an initial vision or whatever, you need those people, they're leaders. But others are followers. And if they see things are going the right way and that trust is built that you heard Doug talk about, then they will jump on board and they'll become excited. So you can prematurely put somebody in that B category. And I agree with what Ned said. It's rather dangerous, to start talking A and B.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question, if you're dealing with a company that's been in business for a while and they're trying to improve their culture and trust, this is a whole lot of stuff we just presented in this last hour. Where do you really start?
I can make one suggestion. Get the book Traction by Gino Wickman. And it takes you through creating the foundation to build a really healthy company. And you can self-implement this. You don't have to use someone like myself to guide you through the process. But the ultimate goal is to create transparency so that people know where you're going. They know how they contribute. They know what's expected to them. It's all clear, open, and honest. And that culture is really part of who you are. You hire for culture. You terminate for culture, misalignment. And that book is valuable. I recommend you start there. And I'm always open to questions, so you can always contact me and I'll be happy to guide you through the path.
To expand on that a little bit too, when we talk about change management, and I've been in large institutions that have had major transitional opportunities where culture really needed a shift. And I've seen some that have succeeded and some that have failed. And part of the issue you get into is that cultural shift, unfortunately, it implicates the leadership team a lot of times. So if the individual who's ultimately responsible for that organization has to make very clear what's going on, it's helpful to look for transition points. It gives you an opportunity to do that. And then you have to follow the pattern of who your thought leaders are. And if you find people on the leadership team aren't willing to do that or aren't willing to buy into that, it's time to start looking at other alternatives. And depending on the size of the organization, very large organizations, a lot of times you will have to go all the way down to what we traditionally call middle management. Because once a culture gets rooted in there, it's very, very challenging and a tough challenge to try and change that culture. Again, because culture is based on thousands of behaviors on a daily basis that a lot of people can observe, but a lot of others are unobserved by the leadership on the team. So it's a challenge. It can be done.
And I've found that a lot of small companies really haven't even written down their values. And without values, it's hard to really fully, have people understand what your culture is. But the thing you want to avoid is have the leader put, these are the values. You want to get folks, and Rainey will tell you more about this as well, but you got to get people engaged in what values really make a difference, for the company itself. If it's you, the leader, saying, this is our values, generally it's not going to work.
Yeah, and on the question of where do you start with all this, this is true, I think, in a pre-existing business. I think it's healthy for the owner / leader to intentionally have a huddle with the team and say, okay, let's take a pulse here. Let's talk about what we've been able to accomplish, what we've been doing, where are we going, what's your view of where we're going, and let's begin making a list of what we might need to change if we are not on path for that vision that we started with. So it's incumbent on the leader to have the crystal clear vision that, and it's very fair if you're the owner that you are the one that has the vision. You know where you want to take the company, but how you get there is a function, as Lane said, of getting the team you've got on board with it and talking to you. I know, just quickly, through this COVID experience, a lot of the small business owners I've talked to have had huddles with their team and have had some amazing output from those meetings, with the team coming up with very creative solutions on how to survive this market, the pivots that need to be made, et cetera. So,
yeah, Doug, one of the things I did personally when I was responsible for Lockheed Martin's work on the X-38 is we would have weekly meetings with the project managers, and virtually every meeting I would ask the question, after saying, this is sort of what I see what's going on and where we're headed. And I would ask the question, are we doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? Is there something I need to be doing differently as a leader, or we need to emphasize differently? Now, you can't do that. I couldn't do that as a commanding officer of a Marine fighter squadron, but that kind of attitude of openness on the part of the leadership for direct feedback, appropriately done so and respectfully done so, that has got to be encouraged almost from the get-go.
right.
Leaders have to be approachable.
Okay, we're coming up very close to the top of the hour here. We've got one or two more questions. There was an ask about, do each of us on the panel have a favorite book or speaker? A couple have already written in the chat here and responded to that. Anybody else have something in particular? Rainey, you've mentioned Traction. That is a great book, by the way. And the one you had in your slide, yeah. Patrick Lencioni, his work on team building. And
he has a huge collection, absolutely. And yeah, I know we're running out of time. There was something about communication and remote working. And anybody, if you're welcome to reach out to any of us to take you further in depth on these questions. I have one client that every morning they get everybody together for a bit of a roll call. You gotta frequently communicate, like every day, sometimes multiple times a day. So it's over communicating when you're dealing with remote, setting clear expectations.
Yeah, as a commanding officer, I used to walk around in the morning when the mid shift was coming off, day shift was going on. And I'd stay late enough for the evenings when the day shift was going off and the evening shift. And I would spend time just walking around the hangars and the spaces, just talking with Marines. and more importantly, listening and observing.
All right. I think that's all we've got time for, folks. Let me say that the recording of this session will be posted on the Silver Fox website. It will probably be a couple of days before we get through production and get it up there. But we will have the video and the slide deck available. As several have mentioned, feel free to reach out to any one of us, and you'll also be able to find us individually on the Silver Fox site. I will tell you, if you try to jump over there right now, this minute, we are undergoing a major facelift on the website. It will be turned on for public consumption on Thursday. So look forward to that. And we thank everyone for attending today.
Thank
Be
you.
safe. Thank you.